Right, so everybody, most important thing today is to get you familiar with the Truman website and the application itself. But before we go into that, I do want to give Ethan a chance to say say hi and perhaps just tell them who you are as a Truman Scholar, like why you applied and what you're doing with your Truman experience.
Yeah. So hi everyone, my name is Ethan Barnes. I'm the 2025 Truman Scholar from Washington, D.C. I'm primarily interested in criminal justice reform, particularly within policing. And then what was your other question?
Sort of what you've gotten out of your Truman experience thus far would probably be a
I would say like the biggest thing I got from the Truman experience as far as the community. I'm still like early in, so just recently won it, but the community has been really impactful, and just having those group of people to lean on who are not experts but doing like highly impactful work in a multitude of different fields has been a great experience. And then also like the guidance with graduate school. For me personally, in law school, having the Truman community to lean on, we had Eric Abrams, who was, I think he was like, yeah, he was the former Stanford admissions officer. I can't remember which program,
I think
but
at the law school.
yeah, maybe it was a law school. Look over my application material and stuff like that. Has been a big help in my process.
Cool. TSLW in a sentence, because that's one thing that isn't in the application fully, but you need to know is that if you are selected as a Truman Scholar, you must attend Truman Scholarship Leadership Week to attend a ceremony in Independence, Missouri, but also hang out in Liberty, Missouri, on the campus of William Jules. The best thing about TSLW.
I would say like the activities were pretty fun. I think like just getting to know people, like there was a lot of people from various different states that like I had never been to. So just getting to learn about different parts of the US and just meeting people that may be from like Idaho or like Iowa or something like that, and learning about like the differences and like their experiences and mine that was really fun.
That is a really good place to start, because I always want to make a point of going through the sort of selection process for Truman as we embark on the application. So, in my opinion, far too few students before filing a campus application go through the advice and guidance on the Truman website. The Truman website is actually far better structured than many scholarship websites in terms of making clear what you need to submit and why and how they are going to be evaluating things. So this advice and guidance page has a lot. I'm not going to read through it all here, but I encourage anyone who follows through with an application to do so. Most importantly, for the campus process, they have the sample application. Now, they also have example responses, and they show you how readers are rating your application. They have and they have advice on various parts of the application. So if you are following through, you're going to file to me by email on the Monday after Thanksgiving a completed sample application. You will have circulated the letter of recommendation forms to your references. They don't need to put their recommendations necessarily on the form. They can if they will, they can want to, but it's guidance for them so that they understand the application. And then you probably I give this same rating form to our campus committee that is used at the national level. So understanding how this is going to be evaluated and so forth is all very transparent with Truman, and you want to take advantage of that. So when we're looking at the sample application materials, I always just say, come right on down here. They do have, Word, and today my goal is to just walk through this so that you all can understand what the parts of the application are, hear from me, what I'm advise you think about and what tends to come up in campus discussions, and then you can also get Ethan's perspective on what it was to write this application. So the reason I said it was a good place to start when Ethan said he'd met people from all these from all the states of the union. The Truman wants representation from across the country. We are a university in the state of Illinois with a very high percentage of students who are from the Midwest and from Illinois in particular. I always say we could probably put forward 4 students every year, all of whom would be from Illinois and all of whom would be strong candidates, but we're not going to do that because they're going to knock one another out. The Truman Committee is charged with building a team that is going to have the best representation of our students across the country. So as Ethan said, he won as the scholar from Washington, D.C., although he is at Northwestern. And if you look on our website and you look at the various winners from over time, we've had Truman Scholars from Illinois, but we've also had them from across the country. They do, and again, Ethan is in the category, have special additional slots for students who have transferred because they are aware of the issues that transfer students face in terms particularly of having consistency of engagement on campus, letters of recommendation, and so forth. Where did that? Okay, everybody's in. So we are starting with the Sample Truman Scholarship application. They collect a great deal of information that is going to be about your past activities. You could call it a resume section, but it is beyond that because one, they want to know about your high school activities as much as your college activities, and they break it into all sorts of different categories. Having a dense presentation of engagement, most particularly in the public service arena, is the most common characteristic of Truman Scholars. So public service, both in terms of these activities and when you're framing your public service career ambitions in this application, means .gov, .mil, .edu, .org. Am I missing one? But definitely not .com. And that is one of the most common questions I get is, oh, well, I want to work at a law firm, but I want to work on pro bono stuff. Or I have worked at a law firm on pro bono stuff. You were still working at a .com. So that's not going to be the same as if you were working as an intern in the DA's office. And that sort of understanding of how public service is defined is of importance as you approach the application. Ethan, in terms of how you thought about this stuff, tips, guidelines, barriers?
Yeah, I would try to frame everything in a way that you let it all connect. So like if you have like a particular activity, so I wouldn't necessarily list every single activity if you don't think it's like particularly significant. Like if you were just a member of a club in high school, you didn't really do much in the club, I probably wouldn't recommend listing it. But I would make sure to emphasize like if you're interested in climate change, all the extracurriculars you've done on climate change, just so that like the person reviewing your application can tell that you have this deep interest in climate change just by looking at the both like the quality of your extracurricular experiences, but also like the sheer quantity as well over time.
And on that So throughout this application, you are pulling you're trying to create a thread, a connective thread in terms of what is the problem you wish to address with your public service career. And we're going to get to the written articulation of that in a bit, but it is exactly what underscores Ethan's advice in terms of thinking in each of these sections, what have you done that has built up your toolkit and ability to confront the issue that is driving you to seek a public service career. I do want to focus for a moment on part-time jobs, because this is the one place I think folks leave stuff off because they think flipping burgers at McDonald's or whatever doesn't sound sexy, doesn't sound connected to public service. On the other hand, the ways in which you have had to use your time to support yourself while you've been doing all your public service activities is important framing for how they understand how you live your life and under what constraints you're living your life. So if you were having to work part-time throughout high school and college while you were doing all of these things, that does look different than somebody who never had to work never worked a part-time job. So don't sell yourself short in that space. That allows folks to get some critical information. Now we're moving on to number 7, which is the specific example of your leadership. Ethan has already heard, anyone who's met with me has heard the term library of anecdotes more times than they want to, but this is the first anecdote-driven answer in the Truman application. And it's why I advise before you start writing, you first build a broader library of your anecdotes so that you can then step back and think about which one is going to fit best as an example of your leadership. And the most common thing I run across, it was not an issue with you, Ethan, but sometimes students want to use an example that was from high school. Even though they want to know your high school activities, these anecdote-driven answers should be more contemporary than that. They don't have to be from 2 weeks ago, but they should be from during your college experience, and you need to demonstrate the extent of your impact, right? So it's not about title. Truman says this endlessly. It is not about title. It is about demonstrating what was the scope of your impact. And that might be demonstrated through numbers. That might be demonstrated through numbers either in terms of number of people, amount of money raised, any number of things that you want to think about how you quantify.
What I would say regarding it is, I would say title doesn't matter, but at the same time, when you're thinking about topics to write the leadership section on, think about it from the perspective of the person who's going to be reading these applications. So like I wouldn't recommend, writing your essay on like a high school club leadership position, or necessarily like a club leadership position where you didn't really make much of an impact. You just kind of organized meetings, because that's probably going to be one of the more cliche examples. I would really try to dig deep in terms of trying to find a leadership example that connects with your area of interest. And ideally, make sure to emphasize if you didn't have a unique leadership strategy that you ended up implementing that relates to your area of interest, because they love that. That shows creative and outside the box thinking.
Exactly. They want to see how you achieved your leadership goals, and you might have learned that on the job rather than imposing some. In fact, I'd argue for most undergraduates, it's something they've learned on the job rather than coming in and imposing a pre-existing set of leadership values. So the next is number 8 is again anecdote driven and a satisfying public service activity. And this is again where the common issue is someone's like, well, I was working, I had my summer finance internship at Goldman Sachs, but I worked on their community development program. That's still at a .com. They don't mind if you were paid while you were doing this. That used to be a common question and a sense that you weren't supposed to be paid. If you were paid while you were working on a political campaign or a government office or for a nonprofit or anything with any of those .mil.org.edu, that's fine. You can still write about that here. It just needs to be something that was not a private sector sponsored activity. And this is, I would say, the thing that most frequently flips between the campus and the national level is that somebody might write up what they think is their best leadership experience, and then they write up their best public service experience, and the committee reads it and gets the letters of recommendation that are tied to them and goes, well, actually, this public service thing seems like you had a really big leadership impact. Have you thought about writing about that? You can do that for yourself first up, but that is part then of the campus process. And this ties back to the issue with letters of rec. Those letters of rec are linked to these examples. So your leadership recommendation needs to be able to testify in some way to your leadership example. In some instances, they saw what you did and it's great and it's easy and they can corroborate it in detailed terms. In other cases, they may have to say that, well, I didn't see student X campaign for poverty reduction on campus, but I did work with them in this other capacity where I saw them do similar community building exercises, and I know that this is indeed how they operate as a leader. The same is true for the public service activity. You have to have a public service letter that corresponds. And in this one, the having somebody who again saw the activity, whether or not they were a direct boss, whatnot, the leadership and public service letters do not need to be from academics. They need to be from folks who actually have seen you do this work. And having those letters can help the campus committee help you improve. And this is where you do not need to stop with only the 3 required letters at the campus level. If you want to give us 2 leadership letters and 2 public service letters, you pick the examples you want to write about when you file it with the committee. But sometimes those letters allow the committee to see and understand. Now, the all-important problem or need of society you wish to address when you enter public service, drawing on statistical data. This is the crux of it. This is what your prior activities is supporting and what you're going to build out in the future-looking essays. Ethan, what for the public service and then the problem or needs of society, what did you find helpful to think about and or difficult?
I would say it's definitely difficult for many people to be able to distinguish like what's your most impactful leadership um moment, and then also like what's your most impactful public service activity, because usually they're going to be overlapping, just because if you're really focusing on trying to make this impact in public service, you're usually going to end up in some type of leadership position, so that like trying to distinguish the two can be hard. But I do think it's important that like they could kind of flip and be one another, and still work. Like you should still show clear leadership within your public service activity response. Like you shouldn't just focus on just um, exemplifying what they're saying in the prompt. You should also try to imbue that with like a leadership aspect. And I would say like with 9, regarding the problem that what is this, the society question?
Yeah, the
Okay.
problem you want to address with.
Yeah.
Is when you enter public service.
Yeah, I would say that should connect with like the rest of your application, as I said before. And it should be honest. Like, if what do you think is the most pressing problem that society is facing right now, and how does this relate to like what you want to do? It reminded me a lot of like a research paper, in the sense that you're using statistics to support your argument, and you end up finding citations to support your argument. But I would really think pretty thoroughly on the problem that you think is most pressing, because you will, if you do end up being interviewed about it, that you want to make sure that your answer for it is good.
And that ties them into, what are the three most significant courses you have taken in preparation for this career addressing the issue? Now, I always say those three courses don't all have to have been in a sort of direct linear connection to public service. Sometimes it can be really interesting to demonstrate how you learned something in a course that isn't in your major or whatever, but really shaped how you think about your engagement with the world. But in each case, you aren't just listing the course in a very tight frame, you are sharing why that was impactful for you, and how it shaped your thoughts about your thoughts about your future career. Sometimes one of the professors from one of these courses is going to be your academic letter writer. That can be nice. Doesn't have to be. It's not required in the way that the connection between the public service and the leadership letters are by the foundation in terms of thinking about their evaluation. But it is something that has a natural logic to it, that if these are courses that really shaped you, then having the faculty member who saw you in that course and understands how it connects sometimes makes a great deal of sense. I do think particularly, Ethan, I'm just curious for you as a transfer student, this is another place where Truman knows, because you pivoted from campus and whatnot, that there's going to be a sort of different valence to it than for somebody who's been at one place the full time. But any remembrances of difficulties and or sort of positive engagements with picking your courses?
Yeah, I would say I had fun with this question. I tried to pick my courses for this question in a way that they abstractly linked to what I wanted to do. So like, what were the abstract skills that, say, my gender studies course taught me, and how I could apply this as a prosecutor in the future. Or I'm blanking on like the other one, but I know like statistics. So, like, how can this help me as a prosecutor in the future? And I think like it gives you like a nice point of reflection to kind of think about your journey academically, and how this has led you to the career that you want to pursue in the future.
So one of my other overused phrases is that with any application, you're trying to demonstrate the depth of your experience and what you're proposing you want to do, the breadth of your interests and activities, and how you've changed over time. And what Ethan just illuminated is one of the ways that this question can enable you to show both your breadth and how you, as a young committed leader and problem solver, have taken that breadth and tied it back in to your area of depth and application. And the gender studies and stats is really nice. Those are not Ethan's majors, right? They are not specifically on the sort of issues of criminal justice reform, and yet they were core skills that he could demonstrate would make him better at what he proposed to do in the future. And that now is the graduate education program that you plan to pursue. And to get back to the academic letter writer, this is an important part, that whomever writes your academic letter should be qualified to say that you have the skills you will need to do whatever graduate program you want to pursue, right? So if you are proposing to do a master's in, a master's in public health, the professor you have right for you might be a philosopher, and that's okay, but you want the philosopher to know that they are writing to support you basically in your qualifications to go into public health, so that they're not writing a letter that is aimed for somebody who's applying to do a PhD in philosophy, right? That this is the thing that I say every applicant to the Truman gets, regardless of whether they pass the campus nomination stage, let alone have the delightful outcome Ethan did, is it makes you sit down with your letter writers a year earlier and actually converse with them around your long-term goals and how you're thinking about your graduate education, which hands down makes next steps as a senior much easier. And particularly in this case, you want to have that conversation with your academic letter writer about why you're doing this and what it is you want to pursue.
Yeah.
Does that ring true for you, Ethan, or
Yeah.
not?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say for this question, try to think of it as like, I don't know if you had to write like a why college essay in your college application process, but like you want to label name a specific program that you think can help you achieve your career goals, and also understand that like you're not locked into that program. For example, I remember I think I wrote my graduate program as a JD at Georgetown, for example, or Howard, and I ended up applying to Harvard. So you're not like completely locked in. You just need to show that you have done the thinking on how this future graduate program will help, you in your future career. So think about like the professors that the program offers, or like the research centers maybe that the program offers, etc. And I think like what Beth said regarding being able to sit down with your mentors and really like evaluate um, your preparedness for the program is important also because you'll be applying for that program hopefully soon in the future. So being able to do that a year ahead of time is really impactful.
And so Ethan already discussed how he had, Georgetown and Howard. And I will say, I remember what was particularly impactful in the way he constructed that essay is it was talking about both of those institutions' ability to, while in law school, remain engaged with both federal and local court systems, so that it had a particular pathway to be engaged in criminal justice reform. It also did something critical. You can have a halo and wings, like, okay, great. Ethan is going to Harvard now. He got in, and that's lovely. But I always tell people, you don't put as your graduate education program that I'm going to go to Harvard or Yale Law School, because what that indicates is that you're hung up on the prestige of the program rather than the content. Yes. Ritvic, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Sorry, just a clarifying question on the education program then. Do we have to then be like specific with like, here are some of the programs that I aspire to end up with, or is it acceptable to also have like a more broader concept with what we would do with that degree?
So you need to have examples, and I always advise, and this is particularly the case if it's a professional degree, right? That, you have, so fine, Ethan could have written, I'm thinking about Harvard Law School because the curriculum's structured in this way and it would give me these opportunities. But you also want to have a law school that you've got basically a 100% chance of admission to, that you are committed to learning the skills of a lawyer. The thing that they're looking for that is they're not keen at all on folks who are like, oh, I want to get a law degree because I think having Yale Law on my resume will help me run for office, but I don't actually want to practice law. I don't actually want to be engaged in the legal system. And that's so whether it's med school or law school or doctoral programs or master's in public policy, you want to be clear about what's the content that's going to enable you to fix that public policy program. So I always advise people to have 2 examples of
Got it.
places that they could go, and in certain areas like medicine and law, one of those is likely going to be in your home state, right? Because you've got that's going to enable you, if you're going to, if you're from Illinois, great. Maybe your top choice is, Yale law. Well, you're not going to use U Chicago law as your second choice. That's not going to make a lot of sense, but you can get a law degree at the University of Illinois and pass the bar. And the same thing with replace it with Harvard Med and, U of I Med School or whatever. That you want to think in terms of your commitment to do the thing.
Got it. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
I would also say make sure to like name drop specific opportunities that are linked to the program you're interested in, because it just shows a lot more authenticity and shows that you've really thought out the specific graduate program you're interested in.
Absolutely. That again, their in 10A are trying to sort out folks who are just dropping the sort of flashiest name because it's got brand recognition rather than a deep investigation of what they want to learn and how they're going to take it forward.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, and then we get the really forward-looking stuff. So what do you hope to do, and what position do you hope to have upon completing your graduate studies? And I'm going to treat these in 12 and 13 together. What do you hope to do, and position you hope to have 5 to 7 years later? Think about these in tandem, because you're showing a progression, right? Nobody's going to make you do these things. That's not what this exercise is about. Just like the exercise on grad school isn't about you writing in blood that you're only going to go to those 2 schools. It's about showing how you think about your educational and professional development. So moving from what is an ambitious, impactful role you could have immediately post first degree, and then, okay, in the best possible scenario, and frankly, the most ambitious scenario, where could you be 5 to 7 years later? And they're not going to come back and take your money away if that's not what you do. They are very interested in young people who understand power, and they're wanting to see that you understand where you can exert power and influence at every step along the way.
Yeah, I would say these 2 questions are pretty tough, mainly just due to the specificity that they're looking for. I remember sitting and reflecting for a long time about like what the specific position I could realistically attain that would also be ambitious and allow me to achieve my goals straight out of law school. And I'd also write this question as if you're gonna have to defend this in an interview, because that was one of the main questions that came up both in my real Truman interview, but also my practice interviews was, okay, but like, how are you gonna realistically make change within, this specific position? Oh, what happens if this position doesn't exist anymore? Like, what are you gonna do?
Absolutely. And I think that getting in the right mental and analytical framework for those 2 is one of the best things that you can do for yourself, both go ahead.
No, I have another one. Also, I think something helpful to do is like to look up, I don't want to say one of your heroes or something like that, but like somebody who's doing the work currently that you're interested in doing, and look at their career path, because that can offer both like a realistic career path, because you want it to be ambitious, but it also needs to be realistic, because that is something they will dig into. If it's not necessarily realistic, you can't say, oh, I'm right after law school, I hope to become a senator. It's possible. It's not necessarily realistic.
Only if you're 35 when you graduate.
Yeah.
From school.
Yeah, but it's not realistic. But like looking up somebody who's doing the work you currently want to do, you can almost trace their career path, and use that as sort of inspiration and for these questions.
Absolutely. And this is something where if you go back to those folks that may have already been your leadership and public service mentors, the folks that you've engaged with in those capacities, you may never have taken advantage of sitting down to talk to them about what they see going on around them in terms of what's the most useful training and timeline and development, but this is now your excuse to do so. And certainly for those who are nominated at Northwestern, then we match folks up with people around town and on the committee and so forth, because again, that's something that we see as fundamental to the pedagogical opportunity of a Truman application, is to talk to folks about that and what is going to be a path towards accomplishing your goals. And then it helps you reflect on your application, but more importantly, it helps you reflect on what it is you hope to do and what you're getting out of your senior year and the years thereafter. Last but absolutely not least is number 14, which is the closest that comes to a personal statement in the Truman application. But I always advise that you write everything else and then pause and go back and read through everything and think about, what do they not know about me that they should know about me? And how does it tie together with this long-term goal? Because 14 is the bow on this package. It is where you can bring everything together, but it is also an opportunity to include critical information that you realize isn't going to appear elsewhere in the application. So it's a tremendous opportunity that is easy to blow if you don't conceptualize well what its function is within the application. I mean, Ethan, I'm particularly curious, like when you get to TSLW, whether people talk about 14, because sometimes it's very personal, sometimes it's not, but I wonder.
I would say that the main thing we talked about was like policy proposals.
Okay.
Just like policy topics. I think that's what came up the most.
Okay, tips though, in terms
Yeah.
of balancing that, weaving things together and
Yeah.
interjecting new information on 14.
I would think of it more so as almost like a Common App essay. I would write it in a sense that like you have some type of interesting hook. Don't be too boring with it, but also make sure you get to the point with it. But just as Beth said, look at what you've already wrote and then look at like what is missing, and then also think about it in the sense that your possible interviewer or application reader is going to read this. You may have to defend what you end up saying in question 14. So make sure that like you're writing something that you'd be comfortable talking about and possibly defending.
And so something, particularly the folks who run Truman have said this with increasing frequency over the last decade, that they're always concerned. If you write about it in number 14, it can become part of an interview. And that's the same whether it's on the campus or not. So this is where if you go to our website or anywhere else, we'll say, look, we're mandatory reporters. I have filed many mandatory reports based on number 14. When folks are comfortable sharing stuff like that with me, I'm honored that they feel comfortable, and I, will take it. But to me, I'm more concerned that folks realize they are sharing something deeply personal that now is going into a space where it could come under questioning.
Yeah.
In ways over which I certainly don't have control. If on the campus committee, we've got some, we're all held to Northwestern standards, but if you're pushing it out into a Truman committee space, then they're bringing in people from all different perspectives and all different attitudes. So I never want folks I hate the term trauma dumping. And I never want a student to feel that 14 has to be trauma dumping. And Truman has worried that 14 became a spot where people thought they had to trauma dump. So I'm very, to me, it's very important that it not be understood that way. First, because I don't want students to do themselves harm and sort of putting out information that frankly is not stuff they are comfortable and can't discuss healthfully in a public space. On the other hand, just if it is critical information that you feel compelled to share, know going in and be prepared for the fact that it becomes part of that conversation. This is frankly true with any it's true with any application, but Truman in particular has noticed this with 14, and so I wanted to make sure that I alluded to it. Ethan, if you've got anything more on that before I bring up the policy proposal, or while I bring up the policy proposal, but.
Yeah, I don't really have much more to add. I would just really emphasize the point that just be ready for it to come up in an interview. So if it's something that you're not ready to dig too deep in, I probably wouldn't write about it, just in case you get probing questions in your interview that want to dig deeper into what you're writing about in question 14.
I know we have had students who, and I have written about assaults and so forth, that have then taken questions in interviews about why they didn't report, or all of these things that you need. And if someone's ready for that and they're in an activism space and they're used to talking about it, then that's fine. But it's something that I want people to know. I never want it to come as a surprise. And frankly, some of those students have thanked me because I sort of prep them for the notion that this is going to be a different kind of conversation than you may have had in other places.
But I don't want to but don't be afraid to write about something impactful. I think it's honestly one of the most important parts of the application, just because of the leeway you're given to talk about what you want to talk about versus everything else being so structured to what Truman is particularly hoping to hear about. I would use it as a point for you to emphasize something that you care about, and that kind of ties everything else together.
Absolutely. Okay, and now the pièce de la résistance, the policy proposal, which we haven't left that much time for, and yet here it is, the thing that is the closest to the sort of research proposal, if you will, of the application. I love this thing. I love this thing because it enables everybody in their junior year to think of, if they had a magic wand, what would they propose and how would they do it? I love it because I used to be a student Congress person, and I think it's basically writing a piece of legislation, and getting familiar with the structure of that is helpful. So I'm going to say my first, sort of my code on this is the problem statement. If you think about a piece of legislation, they start with the whereases. You don't need to write whereas here, but it's a mental tool. The problem statement is whereas X, whereas Y, whereas Z. The proposed solution, if you're looking at legislation, you're moving to the therefores. So given X, Y, and Z, therefore, we're going to do A, therefore, we're going to do B, therefore, we're going to do C. What Truman wants to know is back to, you understand power and you understand the appropriate people who can make the change you propose. So you do not direct a federal highways proposal to the Cook County commissioner, and likewise you don't put out state level children's vaccine rollout to the Senate, right, Department of Justice, or the Senate Committee on Agriculture. So that is the critical piece, is thinking about scope. I've had people who have become Truman Scholars who wrote international proposals. I've had folks who became Truman Scholars who wrote very local proposals. There is not a right or wrong, but it is about showing that you understand the power structure and why you have picked that proposal for that space, and then through the document that you understand, and the major obstacles and implementation challenges, that you also understand who's going to oppose you, that you know what you want to do and who's going to oppose it.
Yeah, I would really make sure that you thoroughly thought about the challenges to your policy proposal, because this acts as a place for you to defend yourself before you get attacked. So making sure that you've let other people who are knowledgeable about your policy area read your policy proposal and kind of nitpick little challenges that you probably haven't thought of. I know I went to a couple poli-sci professors at Northwestern. Shout out Professor Rogers and Harvard Young. But I think it's really I had the most fun writing my policy proposal because it allowed me to think more granular and about like an issue that I was passionate about. Um, yeah.
And so again, in terms of how Northwestern moves forward, for our nominees, we give you an additional mentor from the committee to talk to you about the application as a whole, and sometimes that's around the policy proposal, sometimes it's around your long-term career aims, but we partner with the Office of Government Relations, and so the Office of Government Relations works at our nominees' policy proposals and does a sort of gut fact check on, okay, wait, that's, are you sure you want to direct it here rather than there? Maybe you want to think about it the other way around. And sets up our nominees with local politicians and public servants then to have them get a chance to sort of see what their response is. That's the thing that I consider our gift to anyone who puts through this level and represents Northwestern at the national level is we are giving you that extra level of education and support. In Ethan's case, he got to walk away with the money and the full kahuna, but I still think years ago there was a young woman who wasn't a finalist, but that year government relations, went down to Springfield, and she ended up having a really, momentous conversation with the state legislature around what, her policy proposal was. And that was a great thing for her, regardless of the outcome.
But yeah, I think that was also like an impactful moment for me. I think it was Alderman Conway, who looked at my policy proposal and he had DC connections. So like being able to talk to him about how my policy related to DC and look at different angles that I just hadn't thought about because I haven't worked professionally in the legal context, compared to him in DC, I think was really helpful. And that relationship, I think, will continue to be impactful moving forward.